Okay. Good morning, world. This is Rose Hoey, ISTDP psychotherapist from Melbourne, Australia. Today we're talking to Dr. David Hanscom. He's actually an orthopedic surgeon, and in his career he realised that many of his patients were not actually improving from their surgery. So he began to look at it from a different angle. Thank you for David for being here with us. Oh, by the way, Dr. Tova isn't with us because in Israel, it's the middle of the night. So thank you, Dr. David. First of all, would you bring into the conversation the fact that, you did all this work and yet you didn't get a satisfactory outcome or the outcome that you wanted, and that you've
Well,
written 2 books now already and been part of a movie called Love Heals. So could you just sort of share with our audience how it all transpired and where you're at now?
Rose, thank you. I'm happy to be on the show. I know you and Tova do great work, and so I'm really happy to talk to your audience. But what's going on is it's been a long time now. I graduated from my spine fellowship from Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1985, and I came out of there like every young surgeon, just on fire to do surgery. Now, I actually feel guilty if I couldn't find a reason to do surgery. Then the year I came into practice in Seattle, this new plate came out called a Steffi plate, and we were doing 9 times the rate of spine surgery per capita as any place else in the country for back pain. So we do these little tests called a discogram, or we see a degenerated disc, and we would do a fusion. So I was one of those people that actually did this aggressively for about 8 years. And my results were all over the map. Some people did well, most people didn't. Then the data came out in 1993 that the success rate of a back fusion for back pain in the state of Washington in workers' comp was 22%. And I thought it was like 90% because it's a big operation. And so then the data kept coming out that, well, disc degeneration is normal. Bone spurs are normally aging spines. Herniated, bulging, slip disc, all these things are actually normal aging anatomy, and have been well documented to not be a source of pain. So we're doing billion. So it happened in 1996. A new procedure came out called a cage, where we went through the front part of the spine to reinforce the spine. We were better at getting fusions, but again, the fusions weren't indicated. Those who were doing a major operation on a normally aging spine that had been documented not to be a source of pain. So around that time, I went into chronic pain myself for about 15 solid years, manifested by multiple physical symptoms, anxiety, depression, ringing in my ears, headaches, burning in my feet, skin rashes, all sorts of things were happening in my body, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And one of the symptoms was crippling anxiety. And I came out of the whole thing by accident, honestly by accident, in about 2003. So it's about 20 years ago. And I didn't know how I got into it. I didn't know how I came out of it. So I went on this quest, obviously, to find some answers. So about 2009, things started to come together in a big way. I wrote my first book in 2012 called Back in Control, A Surgeon's Roadmap out of Chronic Pain. The second edition was published in 2016. Then I wrote a third book in 2019 called Do You Really Need Spine Surgery? So it just takes the decision-making process around spine surgery and breaks it down into 2 issues. One is the anatomy. Is it normal or not normal? And the other one was the state of your nervous system. So I won't go into the details of that right now, but the bottom line is I'm not against surgery. I'm a surgeon. If something needs surgery that's going to work, I'm going to do it. But if you do surgery on a normal spine, that's not a good idea because the surgery itself is rather destructive. It's also been documented no matter how appropriate the surgery, if you operate in the presence of a fired up nervous system, the results are not only terrible, they actually can cause chronic pain. So now that I understand the nature of chronic pain, how it works, why I also learned that anxiety is actually not a psychological issue, it's a physiological state of fight or flight. And that's a conversation we'll have today, is that I went from being a fearless, absolutely fearless spine surgeon, my attitude was bring it on, to crippling anxiety in one day. And then I could not put it back into the bag. So I thought it was psychological. I went to counseling for like 13 years, for goodness sakes, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse. So anyway, what's happening, I realized that we're doing spine surgery on what we call anxiety, which is not psychological. It's a state of fight or flight. How's that for a long answer to a short question?
A great answer. Thank you for that. Now, let's talk about fight and flight, because we're doing it for a reason, aren't we?
Right.
There's a reason behind this. And the reason is a fear, isn't it? Or, something dangerous is going to happen. So I need to be in charge, in control, and make sure everything is okay. And then, of course, our bodies rebel, don't they?
Well, it doesn't rebel, it's protecting us. In other
Sure.
words, every living creature has a survival reaction. So my cat is lying here peacefully sleeping, she's at rest. But if another cat comes into the yard, she goes crazy. She goes into fight or flight. Or if you are confronted by a dog charging at you, or your high school bully, or an angry boss, what happens? I mean, your heart starts to race, your skin starts to sweat, you just feel anxious and agitated. And what are you feeling? So it's your body's chemistry. In other words, we somehow think stress is a psychological issue. It's your survival response.
Exactly.
And every living creature has it. So anxiety is a word that humans have. So we're in this agitated, hyper alert state. Why we don't feel very good. But it's not supposed to be very good because the species of creatures that did not pay attention to this cue didn't survive. So we're actually survival of the most anxious as well as the survival of the fittest.
That's right. But what about when it doesn't turn off?
Well, for most people, it doesn't, because humans have a unique problem and we have consciousness. So it turns out that thoughts are sensory input, just like hot, cold, whatever it is, just like a physical sensation that we don't like. Thoughts do the same thing to the human brain as a physical threat does. So the problem with humans, of course, is that you cannot escape your thoughts. And what's even worse is when you repress your thoughts or suppress your thought, it actually makes it worse. And actually, thought suppression actually has been shown a lot of things, but one of them is to shrink your brain, particularly the memory center called the hippocampus. And thought suppression has actually been documented with increased opioid use. So you actually cause structural damage to your brain with thought suppression. So you suppress these unpleasant thoughts or you experience them, your body senses now a threat, your nervous system processes it, says danger. And so unlike my cat, we have a whole other level of threats that my cat doesn't have. So we cannot escape our thoughts. So thoughts are sensory input that we can't escape. And then the physiology or the fight or flight response is our emotions. And so when you sense a threat, so let's look at threat versus safety. So I have a model called dynamic healing. So there's three parts to it, which is true in every living creature. You have the input or your circumstances or your stresses. Remember, every creature has to compete to stay alive. Then you have your nervous system that processes all the sensory input. And if you didn't have a nervous system, you wouldn't do anything. I mean, there's nothing in my brain, nothing in my hands that says this is cold or hot or whatever it is. It's your brain interpreting signals from your sensors that tell you whether something's dangerous or not. So I have this input that I now sense is dangerous. Let's say it's unpleasant thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And my nervous system is trying to process this. And it says danger. Then it goes into the output of the physiology or safety versus threat. And threat is what we know is flight or fight. And that's full of adrenaline, which speeds up your heart rate and breathing, causes your skin to sweat, causes your muscles to contract. It diverts the blood supply from your brain, the thinking part of your brain, and your intestines and bladder. It also puts off what's called inflammatory cytokines, which are small proteins, small molecules that just fire up the whole immune system. So we've known this for decades, but I didn't really understand this till a few years ago. Sustained chronic stress causes disease because you're on constant fight or flight. So with humans, we can't escape our thoughts. And that's my biggest focus right now are these, I'll use the word obsessive thought patterns, disturbing thought patterns. I developed what's called a full-blown obsessive compulsive disorder, which is an extreme form of this, where you're just manifested by every 5 to 10 minutes thoughts. And then I have what's called internal OCD. I wasn't washing my hands or climbing up and down stairs. I just had thought, counter thought that never stopped. So then you're in fight or flight all the time. Then when your body's in fight or flight, think about this. You're fired up, you're on alert. It's not going away. It's like driving your car down the freeway in second gear. It's going to break down. So what happened with me, there's over 30 potential symptoms of being in sustained fight or flight, or I call sustained threat physiology. And physiology, by the way, is how the body functions. And so I had 17 of these symptoms. I had ringing in my ears, migraine headaches, neck pain, back pain, stomach issues. My feet were burning, skin rashes were popping up all over the place, and it made no sense to me. And of course, I saw multiple physicians, multiple tests. Of course, quote, nothing was wrong. And many of my patients in chronic pain are frustrated because the doctors say, well, there's nothing wrong. Well, there is something wrong. Your body's in fight or flight and it won't turn off. That's a huge problem.
It is.
So,
yes.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. So just because it's not a bone spur doesn't mean you're not suffering. So it's relentless and people flat out get sick.
When they get sick, they then focus on the symptoms rather than the fact that they're in fight and flight. Now, you've created an app, I believe. You've also been part of a movie called Love Heals.
Right.
Now, so you're moving into a different area, an area where we're not just focusing on the symptoms, but we're actually focusing on the larger life. Would you expand on that a little bit more now?
Well, we have a model called dynamic healing. So when your stresses are a threat, your body goes into fight or flight. And so the essence of illness or symptoms is sustained exposure to threat physiology. And the solution is learning to focus on the physiology to allow yourself to shift into safety. So remember, in fight or flight, you're consuming resources. We call it catabolism. You're consuming fuel from your own body to stay alive. And anabolism is where you build up reserves to be ready. But I mean, how long would you survive without anxiety? I'm sorry. So the sensation generated by this chemical reaction is what we call anxiety. My cat just does her thing and she moves on. So we have sustained exposure to fight or flight because of our disturbing thought patterns, amongst other things. And then the pain itself also creates threat. So pain isn't the problem, it's the anxiety or the reaction to the signal. So what happens is that there's ways of learning you can actually work on processing the stresses differently. You can't avoid stress. You can learn to increase the resiliency of your nervous system, so it takes more stress to actually set off fight or flight. Then there's ways of actually directly lowering your body's physiology from fight or flight to safety. So again, the key issue here, I'm going to use the word activated nervous system instead of the word anxiety. So your activated nervous system is critical for survival. I mean, how long would we survive if we didn't have this warning system?
That's right. That's the thing. This is a normal response to threat, to danger. It's normal. But what happens is it doesn't turn off.
Well, also remember, your body is programmed to automatically avoid danger. In other words, when I walk by the stove, I don't put my hand on the stove because my body says that's dangerous. So remember, your brain is programmed to keep you away from pain. I remember, it's automatic. So your fight or flight system is in place all the time. You're on alert all the time. So we call the nociceptive system, and your brain automatically guides you in a way to stay safe. The key issue is that anxiety or an activated nervous system is simply a chemical reaction that is 1,000,000 times stronger, than your conscious brain. And they're two separate things.
Say that again, please.
Your unconscious survival reaction.
Yes.
What we're going to call anxiety and anger.
Yes.
Are 1,000,000 times stronger than your conscious brain.
Good.
1,000,000. So you can't do mind over matter. It's not going to work. If you didn't have anxiety, it's necessary. It's more than it's how we stay alive. It's how we evolved. It's how we stay alive. Is that we pay attention to those cues. But remember, this thing we call anxiety is intended to be so unpleasant that it forces us to take action. And
very nicely said. Would you mind now telling me a little bit more about the fact that it doesn't create that action in people? They stay in the system. They stay in that system instead of moving out. It's sort of like self-reflective capacity that doesn't happen, that they can't actually see out of it.
Yeah, again, with my cat, if she's threatened, she avoids the threat, lays down, and she goes to sleep. So our minds, if you had a bad day at work and your boss is screaming at you, threatening to fire you, etc., your brain keeps spinning away, so you're still in fight or flight. So it's been well documented that mental pain or mental threats are as impactful on your nervous system as a physical threat. It's the same thing. Yes. And so, again, you can't escape your thoughts. I call it the curse of consciousness. It is universal. But the key issue is it's a gift. So let me ask you a rhetorical question that you won't answer. I always ask this question. Okay, so anxiety is a sensation generated by the need to survive. Just a word, just like if you're lying on the beach drinking a beer, you are relaxed. It's just a descriptive word. So if you're being threatened for whatever reason, then you feel anxious. It's just a descriptive word. It is not a diagnosis. Now, the inability to escape it, i.e. your thoughts or some bad circumstance. I mean, lots of things cause threat. Bad marriage, bad relationship, poverty, authoritarianism, all these things cause threat. So there's lots of things that cause threat, and you can't run from most of them. Remember, the stress that's the most stressful is this stress that you can't avoid. People forget this. People talk about stress management like it's going to solve a problem. The stress that you can manage, of course, you're going to avoid it. So it's the stress that you can't escape from. That's what makes you sick,
Yes.
right? So remember, the solution to anxiety is control. When you lose control or can't control a situation, then your body kicks in more of a threat response. You become angry. So when you're trapped by anything, particularly pain, but anything at all, remember, pain's a signal. Pain's not the problem. It's being trapped in your body's reaction to the situation. So you are now trapped, whether it's workers' comp or your pain or bad relationship. Your body really fires up. Your body's in high alert. And we know in chronic disease, people's brains actually clinically shrink because it's full of adrenaline and cortisol, and you're consuming a fuel supply. And so your brain tissue gets consumed with everything else. So it turns out that every chronic disease, every one of them, whether it's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cardiac disease, hypertension, obesity, are all inflammatory disorders, every one of them.
Exactly.
It also turns out that anxiety, depression, bipolar, OCD, and schizophrenia are all inflammatory metabolic disorders. So there's a common basis for all chronic mental and physical disease, every one of them. And it's sustained exposure to fight or flight. Again, we're thinking, so let me ask you, let me go back to the question that you can't answer. Is that, okay, so anxiety is this massive response. It's a million times more powerful than your conscious brain. It's automatic, it's hardwired, you have no control over it. Zero.
That's right.
It's a immediate ratio. Yeah. Right. So how do you solve the problem? How do you lower anxiety?
How do you lower anxiety?
Right. You're being very wise here. So you won't get the answer, because the answer I'm looking for is that you simply lower your fight or flight chemistry. You just find ways to lower that chemical response, because it's a sensation. And if you can learn ways to create a sensation of safety, we call it cues of safety, as opposed to ongoing threat, all these symptoms resolve. Every one of my 17 symptoms has resolved. So in medicine's defense, none of us were trained this way, including myself. I had no idea. If I hadn't gone through what I'd gone through with really extreme suffering for many, many years, I would have no insight into what I'm talking about today at all. And so what I've learned is that anxiety is just one of those sensations generated by sustained flight or fight. But so are autoimmune disorders. So is cancer. All these other major diseases are also caused by sustained fight or flight. In Scandinavia, there's a very large study that shows that if you're in a chronic stress, that you have a 40% higher chance of an autoimmune disorder. And I remember in medical school with these autoimmune disorders, which are horribly deforming, your body, you just watch people's bodies disappear. Yeah. And it doesn't just happen. There's a reason for it. So my cat's going to visit us today. She's...
Oh, how gorgeous is that? Oh, how beautiful.
Anyway, she rules the household, of course. I used to be a dog person, but she sort of spoiled us. Anyway, the key issue is that to lower... So, okay, anxiety and anger are gifts. It's how we evolved. It's how we survived. They're powerful. You can't control them. So the first thing you do to actually solve the problem is you separate your conscious identity from this reaction. It's just a reaction. It's universal. You can't take it personally. It's intended to be amoral. It just is there to protect you. So it protects you. So, but the trouble is it feels bad, because if somebody's in your way of survival, guess what? Your body says, get rid of that person. It's not very nice, right? It's just an animal survival reaction. That's it. So your conscious brain is not, but see, since this chemical reaction is all encompassing, it does feel like who you are, but it's not. So I have people visualize a large thermometer on the opposite wall. And when they feel really anxious and frustrated, I say, look, just visualize how high the thermometer is. The way you drop down anxiety is simply drop down the thermometer. So you can do that. There's tools, so we can discuss this if you want. But the bottom line is there's ways of processing the input or the stresses differently.
Mm-hmm.
You can increase the resiliency of your nervous system. And then there's ways of actually stimulating the vagus nerve, which is powerfully anti-inflammatory, to actually drop down the inflammation. So we call it dynamic healing, is that we address the input, we address the nervous system, and also address the output. And you use this every day. It's very dynamic. It's never one and done. Life keeps coming at us every day. So you just learn how to process your stresses more skillfully. You spend less time in fight or flight. I have to say one more thing here that I just learned this week. I've known this for years, but it just really hit me hard. People decide to learn the tools to actually lower anxiety, lower the stress chemistry. They become very skilled at it, and they heal. People that just read my book or do my course or whatever, nothing happens. You're not going to learn how to play the piano by just reading a book. Not going to happen. So remember, our brain is trained to survive. We're here. A lot of our survival skills, if not most of them, are not very nice and not very functional. So we're very expert at dysfunctional survival skills. It's even worse emotionally because we don't know how to really navigate this emotional landscape that creates the same response. So we're very expert at dysfunctional emotional and physical survival skills. And we're good at survival skills in a way because we know how to get resources, we know how to run over other people, we know how to take care of ourselves. But again, it's a survival mechanism. And if you look at our society and world right now, we're in the midbrain, we're in the survival brain. We're doing things to each other that our neocortex or thinking centers know better. Why are we doing that? The answer is sort of simple, is that under fight or flight, the blood supply shifts from your thinking center down to the midbrain. So you cannot think clearly. So we do these things to other people that are just abhorrent. And it's not because even in a way, it's not because they're bad people, it's just that you've gone from your thinking brain down to the midbrain and you're just in survival reaction. So the other part of the coin is that when were we ever taught to nurture ourselves? Everything's competition, right?
Yeah.
So the two parts of healing there's a book called The Talent Code, which tells how geniuses form. And there's two parts to solving the problem. One of them, become very skilled at processing anxiety and anger. This is a very empirical process, and we can talk about that in a second. But the healing actually occurs as you learn how to nurture yourself and be nice to yourself.
That's right.
So Dr. Ari and I did a workshop yesterday called Love Heals, and it's not the way you think love is. Love is a state of safety. So it actually is healing. Your body can rebuild itself. So anxiety is a physiological state, and so is love. So you're asking, what's my picture to talk about love and anxiety, whatever? Because I'm a physician. I deal with the human body, and I'm not just a technician. I'm not just a surgeon. And we've actually known this since medical school. And somehow we've gotten really off track going to just the technical parts of pain. And it's just not true. And again, pain, what's pain? It can be hot, cold, bright, loud, whatever it is. So remember, pain is just the signal. So your brain has to interpret it as unpleasant enough to actually take action. And on days where you haven't slept very well, haven't exercised, eating badly, it takes much less stress to set off the fight or flight response. So that pain, so the threshold where your brain says danger changes pretty much every day, almost every minute in a way. So pain isn't the problem, it's that neurochemical response that we call anxiety. So I have a new process called the DLC Journey, stands for Direct Your Own Care. The DLC Journey is a computer-based course. And I ask people to spend about 15 to 20 minutes a day on it. And it's just a learned skill. It's like learning the basics on the piano and then building on the layers to actually learn piano. But there's a sequence going from your disbelief to understanding some basic skills to process your anxiety, at least calm it down. Then it goes into the neurochemistry of anxiety. Then it goes into awareness and anger. But it's a sequence of steps that allows you to learn how to process anger and anxiety effectively. But if you look at your entire life as a performance, Learn the skills of process stress. Well, processing stress still doesn't give you a good life. You learn how to process stress, but where's the joy? So the other part, which is also a learned skill, is actually nurturing joy. And remember, our brain's thinking negative thoughts all the time. It's looking for trouble. It's always looking for danger. So the voices in our head program us to always look for danger. You have to reprogram your brain to nurture joy. And again, it's not a psychological construct. You just go on safety, safety, safety. So you have so like for instance, one of the ways we actually process the input, input again is your stresses. So one of the cardinal rules that's made a huge difference is we do not let people discuss their pain ever.
Can you repeat that? Repeat that.
Do not discuss your pain. Do not discuss your medical care. Stop going on the internet and spending all day long looking for a solution. Now, I did this. Remember, I'm not being critical here because I did this. If you're in chronic pain and trapped, why would you spend most of your time looking for a solution? Where's your attention? It's on the problem. So you've reinforced the problem, not the solution. So as people, so also since the mental pain is such a big problem, we say no giving unasked for advice, no criticism, no complaining. Be nice. And
to you, to yourself.
No, for everybody.
Sure, direction. But start off with you.
Well, it goes both ways because if I'm nice to you, I'm going to be nice to myself. Remember, when I'm judgmental of you, I'm only reflecting my view of me, right? So if you want to know how you really feel about yourself, just watch what you judge in other people. That's how consciousness works. So it's been a really powerful tool because people are so used to complaining about their pain. I mean, I ask people this all the time. What percent of your waking hours do you spend either discussing your pain, looking for a cure, seeing doctors, whatever it is? And I would say the average answer is between 60 to 70%. I would put myself in that category myself when I was searching for an answer. Why not? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But again, from a neuroplasticity standpoint, that's where your brain's going to develop is on the pain.
That's right. And talk about the ruminating, not just talking to the doctor or about the doctor, but then the whole, it's like having Greek chorus in your head, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Again, and this is not positive thinking, it's positive vision, positive programming. Okay. So it's not positive thinking is a way of suppressing negative thinking. So hold that question just for a second. I want to go way back to the conversation. So you remember, your brain is always looking for trouble. I call it your personal brain scanner. It's always looking out for danger.
And that's normal.
It's the way it's a gift.
Yeah.
So it's protecting us. So what happens as we are scanning the environment, so you might be on a nice day going for a walk, and you're thinking about next week or the future or your finances or something, your brain will always go to the negative. That's what it's supposed to do. It's also been programmed that way. So once you understand that that's the default mechanism, then neuroplasticity is awareness, separation, and then reprogramming. So you got to become aware. Okay, I'm doing this, but what I'm getting to is that the entire healing journey comes from dealing with your skepticism. In other words, you've tried everything, nothing's really helped. And so it's not about believing me or you or the doc journey or my book. It's not it. So it's about connection. You have to connect to what is. So what's in your mind right now, it has to be skepticism. You shouldn't believe me. In fact, I don't want you to believe me. I just want you to, as one of my successful patients said, just suspend your disbelief enough to start reprogramming your brain and watch. What doesn't work is if you're trying to generate enough belief in this book or this process or whatever it is, just trying to generate a belief actually is extremely counterproductive. So the whole process is actually rooted in your disbelief. Does that make sense?
Yes, keep going. Keep going.
So I have a metaphor. I have a metaphor here. What's that?
This is so important, this whole concept that when you move into your disbelief, you actually then can move out of your belief.
You're connecting. You're connecting with what is. And so remember, healing occurs with connection. Your body knows how to heal. So I have a metaphor. Let me try this one. It's a new metaphor. Okay.
Good. Lovely. Okay,
I came from an abusive past. It was bad. So I was a victim. I have PTSD. I have every diagnosis you can imagine. I had migraine headaches since I was 5. I had all sorts of things happening to me, but I just thought it was normal. And when you come from an abusive environment, you think anxiety and anger are just normal, and they are for a given kid. Then I associated love with violence, because that's what it was, manifested as violence, as being physically beaten and then being hugged and saying, I love you. So it doesn't make any sense, right? Okay. So that's the programming that's there. So my metaphor is a tree, a redwood tree. So for a redwood tree to grow as tall as it does, it has to have really deep roots, right? It has to have a very stable base to grow. So what happens with it? What's that?
Cantilever system.
Right. So what happens is you dig in. Why, if you dig into your past and just be with it, you have a stable base. So it's the root, it's the basis in the nourishment. The soil is rich soil. So in a way, the more negative your past, it's rich soil for growth. So we try to run from it. We are ashamed of it. We try to cover it up. We try to rewrite it. It all takes energy that you need to grow. And so I've always said you have to dig deeper to reach higher. So as you just dig into your past and learn yourself to be with it, just be aware of it. Don't have to fix it, solve it. Just allow yourself to be okay. Instead of going through the shame process and trying to escape it and trying to outrun it, which wipes out your life's energy, is you learn to dig into this past and just be with it. That's where the growth occurs. And so the metaphor to me is a large, high tree that has a very stable base. The stable base, so your past is, how do we say this? Who you are as a person is, let's go back to the love heals concept. So it's a bit of a story, but I won't go into that. So the bottom line is that you can't manufacture love. It's a physiological state. So as you process anger and anxiety, you've now opened the door for the possibility for love to emerge. And love means awareness, play, gratitude, curiosity. Those are the things that are safe. So if you're fighting anxiety and anger, i.e. your past, you don't have time to connect with who you are. And love is commitment, connection, and that's what it is. So from a medical standpoint, is how your body physiology becomes optimized is in that state of being. So a friend of mine, one of our more successful patients who was in chronic pain for 55 years, long story, but what the doctor never asked her was what was going on in her life. Well, what happened? One of her husbands committed suicide. That's a big one. Then in 2008, when her pain just went through the ceiling, her son committed suicide. So just a nightmare thing that's going on in her life, obviously putting her into fight or flight. It took me about a year of working with her, but she's now 85, 86. She's been out of this chronic pain anxiety thing for about 8 years now. And it's all about learning the tools to calm down the nervous system. So it doesn't matter how long you've been miserable and suffering, you can actually move forward. So she came up with a word called, you've heard of the word nourishment, obviously, but she came up with a word called neuroshment. Brain, the neuroplasticity. So the word she came up with was neuroshment, which I thought was a great word. So your past is the fertile ground for your future growth.
It is. It is. Yeah. Would you bring up something that we haven't sort of actually tied in this conversation is about repressing your angry feelings towards people you love? Do you know what I mean?
This is another whole podcast on family issues, but
we need
I went to a process called the
anger
Hoffman. Well, yeah, I mean, families trigger each other. In other words, you have family patterns that are embedded on you by your parents that play out in your new family. And so what happens, we found out the last 2 years of my practice, that the family triggers are the biggest factor keeping people in chronic pain. I mean, why would domestic violence exist? I mean, these are people that you love, but the incidence of physical domestic violence in our country is 28% amongst men and 32% amongst women. Physical violence, that's 1 out of 3. That makes no sense. But see, the trouble is when you're triggered, the blood flow shifts from your thinking center to the lower centers.
Yes.
And then when you suppress it, it makes it even worse. So that when you do explode, it's way out of proportion to the situation. So again, when you're angry, you've literally lost your mind because your thinking centers are no longer working. And then what happened to my mother in her abuse scenario is she would be incredibly abusive. And then all of a sudden she came to her senses, would be incredibly apologetic until she got triggered again. But the triggers weren't from us. I just triggered something in her that was her past. In other words, if you do something that makes me angry, it has nothing to do with you. You just trigger something in me. So there's a book here. I'll just hold it up for a second that I have my patients read, my clients, my fellows, myself. I read it a few times.
What's it called? The way of love.
The way to love.
Oh, the way to love.
He defines love as awareness. So remember, anytime you're anxious or angry, something in the present reminded you of something from the past.
That's
So by
right.
definition, when you're anxious or angry, you're simply not in the present moment. So that's the essence of abuse, is lack of awareness. So he defines love as awareness. And when you're triggered, you're in the past, not the present, right? So what happens is the past is now playing out in the present. It's not who you are. It's these patterns of behavior that have been put into your brain. And so again, it's awareness, separation, and reprogramming. So I did a process which also is in Australia called the Hoffman Process. It's a 7-day workshop. It's not a fix-it workshop. It's an awareness workshop. So they use tools like visualization and music and rhythm. They create an intense awareness of the family patterns put into your brain by your parents and family and peers, etc. Then they have a very creative separation process and a brilliant reprogramming process. And so within a week, it's not a good starting point. In other words, I would not go to HOP until you've maybe gone through my course or somebody else's courses. So you want to have a palpable decrease in your anger and anxiety before you do this. But remember, anxiety is the problem. It's not the pain. And so as you learn to regulate your body's chemistry, then this process does about 5 years of my work in about a week. It's pretty amazing.
Wow. Now, who's the author, please?
So this one is Dr. Anthony DeMello. He
I know Anthony DeMello. Yes.
Yeah. It's called the way. It's really the way to awareness, and then the Hoffman process is all over the world, including Australia, and HOFFMAN. Very powerful process. My whole family's done it. I've had probably over 100 people go. It just changed my life.
Yeah. So this Hoffman process, tell me about that again, or tell our audience a little bit more about that again.
So it's put together in the 1960s, and it has evolved in different ways. But what you learn is that we now know this through neuroscience research, that humans are unique in their way that they're programmed. In other words, you take a horse or a cow or a mammal, they can take care of themselves pretty quickly. Humans with consciousness have to be programmed for at least 16 good years to actually make their way in life somewhat skillfully. But they're just imitating their environment. Mother, father, peers, whatever it is, all you can do is watch. It doesn't matter what the parents say, it's what they do. Their attitudes, their mindset, tone of voice, all those things are programmed into our brains. So that's what's so interesting about the human experience, that every human being is completely programmed by their own personal environment. Each one of us is infinitely unique. I mean, it's unbelievable how different. Well, I can't look at this table the same way you do, because this table has different meaning to it than it does for you. So I live here. This table means something to me. It means nothing to you. So humans give meaning to everything. So we're incredibly programmed. And so most of the programs are not very functional. They're pretty dysfunctional. So Hoffman allows you to systematically, with an organized manner, find out the patterns that are disruptive to you. Did it come from your father or your mother or both? And then what really blew me away was that if you reject the patterns and try to do the opposite, they call it a rebellious pattern, and the pattern is still running the show. It doesn't matter.
It does. It does. I mean, that's in ISTDP. It's so familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a remarkable process. It's not a fixing process. It's an awareness process. You become aware of what's running the show. And I'll just give you one example. Is that, for instance, my father was a brilliant physician, but he came from the country. He could not get along with his peers very well, so he just bounced from job to job to job. So I lived in 12 houses by the time I was 18 years old. And so it was sort of a brutal childhood just from that regard. So I was determined to get a stable job, be successful in my career, and I was. I was very determined not to be my father, except I wasn't being me, right?
Yes.
So that's the key issue, is that once you clear the noise, and again, there's many layers to that conversation also. And again, Hobbes is not a good starting point, but it's a wonderful jumping off point. It just completely changed our lives.
Yeah. Well, Verpaschner is the same thing as well. That 7-day retreat that's available as well.
I'm sorry, which one?
Verpaschner. It's a similar thing. It's a retreat.
No, you mean about Vipassana? That's just a silent retreat. Again, all these things do different things. So Vipassana just allows you to be with who you are. And that's where we'll go back to the metaphor.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Vipassana is completely different. That's a 10-day silent retreat. Hoffman's a very structured 7-day process. And so, yeah, completely different ball game.
I think the result is a similar result, that you're you in essence all the time?
That's a long topic. I've had lots of friends go to Vipassana. You got to be really careful with that, because if your mind's on fire, Vipassana can actually destabilize you a bit, because if you're used to the noise, it keeps you distracted. Being with quiet can be very destabilizing. So again, for a lot of people, it's been really helpful. A lot of people, it's been less than helpful. Even with Hoffman, you have to be ready to do Hoffman,
Well,
and it doesn't.
that's destabilizing in its own way, isn't it? Because you're actually reflecting, which
Right.
is destabilizing in itself. That whole
Well,
idea of
was
looking
that
back.
digging into your past? That's about digging deeper to reach higher. As you dig into your past and learn to be with your past, it's great. But you have to do that carefully. You just can't. In other words, that's why, again, going to the doc journey again, is that there's a sequence where the number one thing through the whole process is just be nice, be nice, be nice to yourself. So if you're uncomfortable with a particular part of the journey or whatever process you do, just stop. So at the end of the day, the solution, by the way, is just be nice, because that's where your brain goes and your body chemistry changes. But again, if you're triggered, you just can't be nice. People would call that passive aggressive behavior. In other words, you're pretending to be nice, but you're really angry inside. As you know, that doesn't work very well either. So again, that's about connection, connection, connection. You have to connect to the anger. You have to connect to the anxiety. As one of my psychology friends has pointed out, you have to feel to heal. So you have to allow yourself to be anxious. You have to allow yourself to be angry. And as you're with it are aware, or in this state, at some point you make a choice just simply to move a different direction or use one of the tools that help calm down your nervous system.
Could you share that again? Share it again. You allow yourself.
You have to feel, as my friend Les Ari says, you have to feel to heal. So like going back to your other question about suppressing emotions,
Yes.
if you don't know what is, you can't change direction. So you have to allow yourself to feel angry. So it's going to be there every day. You have to allow yourself to feel anxious. It's going to be there every day. And then there's just ways of allowing yourself to be with it. And Freud said this over 100 years ago, that the essence of mental health is mental flexibility. Allowing yourself to be unhappy, allow yourself to be uncomfortable. So allowing yourself to be in that state allows you to actually move forward, as my friend calls it, psychological flexibility.
Sure. Without discharge, you mean, though, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Because being angry is one thing, discharging is another, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I have a little saying, we talked about this yesterday in our workshop. Again, love is a physiological state of safety. And I have a little process called 5-3-2, just 5 words, 3 words, 2 words. So if I'm angry, and I like to think that after 20 years of doing this, that I would be above being angry. Not true. I have difficult patterns. I will always be triggered. So when you're triggered, it's very powerful. So the first 5 words are no action and a reaction.
Lovely.
And so when I'm angry, I just become aware I'm angry, and I let myself be that way. Maybe it's not a big deal. I can brush it off pretty quickly. Or maybe I'm really triggered and really angry, and I can't just get rid of it. I can't suppress it. But I make a decision. I'm not going to take any action. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to do anything. I just try to get out of the room.
Yes.
Because as you know, when you're angry, you can't disguise it, right? And so so no action and reaction. The second thing, we call it flip the switch. And this is, again, the input. And I use that word now instead of forgiveness. If you're angry, you're angry. How long do you want to be that way? How long do you want to stay in the victim mode? Then you just make a decision to change direction. Now, you just do it in a millisecond, done. It's not suppressing. You've been in a victim mode long enough, done. Then the last 2 words are move on. Just move on with it. Get your brain going another direction. So what that starts to do, you talk about this ruminating and obsessive thought patterns, which I think are a huge, huge problem of the human existence, is that as you calm down this anxiety, anger reaction, the thoughts start to calm down dramatically. You can't control your thoughts, but you have a lot of say over your body's physiology. And so this other thing called breath work, we do slow breathing or breathe through your nose or different types of breathing techniques. And what they do, they stimulate your vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, which goes to every internal organ in your body, and is very powerfully anti-inflammatory. So just the breath work brings down the inflammatory response into a more normal range. So again, no action in a reaction. Number two, flip the switch, done.
Yes.
Then the third two words is just move on.
I like that one. Move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
But remember, you can't move on until you let go. That's the problem. In other words, people
Yes, good.
think they're
Until
moving
you let go.
on. Right. So again, they're trying to rewrite their past, trying to analyze it, trying to fix it, trying to cover it up. That's what sucks your energy dry. So instead of having the neuroschmidt to grow, you allow yourself to be angry, be cynical, be skeptical, whatever it is, just connect with what is. And then you watch yourself emerge. It's really fascinating to watch people heal. I mean, the body knows how to heal.
It does. Yeah. And I often sort of think about it's the heart that heals. Move on. You let go.
Right.
No,
Well,
no.
but again, let me just be really clear. What I learned the hard way is that it does take a specific sequence of awareness, being with it, and then just allow yourself to really feel the impact of it, which is generally unpleasant. And then you
Okay.
just simply switch gears. So again, there's a metaphor that I use as far as healing, whereas you just picture a bathtub, and the drain represents anxiety and anger. And there's an unusually large drain. And then the water coming in represents the good things in life that you enjoy doing. So people do lots of things to distract themselves from their anxiety, but the drain's wide open. You'll never fill up the tub. So the tools teach you just empirically plug the drain, plug the drain, plug the drain. You do it multiple times a day. And when the drain's plugged most of the time, you can fill the tub up with whatever you want. So not only do people heal from their anxiety and anger and other physical symptoms, they start thriving at a level they never knew was possible, which includes me. I mean, the life I live now has no resemblance to the life I lived even before I started the pain. I have one gentleman who had 28 surgeries in 22 years, suicide attempt, high dose narcotics. Long story short, he's now been out of that situation for 6 years, and he says he's never felt better in his life. I didn't think after 2 or 3 surgeries you could do this, but you can reprogram your brain around anything, even phantom limb pain. So it's remarkable how neuroplastic the brain is. It changes every millisecond. There's 80 billion neurons in your brain. Each neuron is connected to 10,000 other neurons. It's incredibly complicated.
It's so complicated, isn't it?
Yeah.
David, we've got a few questions, and some of these are not really there. You've actually answered them in many ways, but I'll put up what Elisa said, which is she's asking your opinion about anxiety medication, which is sort of like, again, going back to the symptom. So
here's what I'm going to say, which I'm not mainstream on this at all. So so I did this for 4 years in Sun Valley. So if I was your doctor, we'd talk about your anxiety, and I just went straight to Xanax, a benzodiazepam. And I realized that narcotics and benzos are, quote, not good, but I would do all the opioids face to face. People on their opioids, I wouldn't take them off. We would add on Xanax or an anti-anxiety agent. And again, I can say this now since it's off the record, but if it wasn't for Xanax, I would not be alive right now. I mean, it's that the anxiety is so overwhelming and so crippling, you got to get a little bit of space in your brain. The problem is nobody wants to prescribe it anymore. So the reason why it's so addicting, and it is addicting, is because it's so effective. It's incredibly effective. So I'm in favor of a lot of different medications the first 6 to 12 weeks. But as your brain starts to heal, you just don't need them. People come right off of them.
yeah,
I've had people on 1,000 milligrams of morphine a day come off all medications.
yeah, I've found the same with ISTDP, that they go to their psychiatrist and say, "Can I wean off this?" And and the psychiatrist is sort of usually surprised unless they realise that it's an
Right.
emotional. Yeah.
The question was, have your patients never seen it come out of fight or flight? Okay, so again, I want you to go back to the idea that you learn how to play the piano. So again, you learn the basics, you keep advancing, advancing, advancing. For some people, they're out of it in a matter of 4 to 6 weeks, which doesn't happen that often, but it does. So it may take you 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. But again, if you want to play the piano, you practice. So any brain can be rewired around anything. It's always solvable. I don't know what tools are the best for you. The doctrine is a foundational set of resources. I do encourage to bring other ones in. But what I don't encourage people to do is to jump around. You want to just take a certain set of skill sets, learn it, make it automatic. Your brain starts to physically strain structure. So remember, you're not trying to cure anxiety. You're trying to develop a working relationship with it. And then once it's over, I mean, I had OCD. I had the worst form of OCD you can imagine. It has a terrible prognosis. These obsessive thought patterns are horrible. They torture a lot of different people. But I have an 8-year-old girl who's the daughter of one of my son's neighbors, and she's had panic attacks, anxiety reactions, all sorts of stuff. But by using different techniques to calm down that nervous system, within 2 months, she's almost out of the woods completely.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Calming down the nervous system allows the person to use their neocortex as well, doesn't it? Because they're no longer, yes. So that's our human sort of part of us, isn't it? Like the cat.
But you also have control. In other words, if you're going to learn how to snow ski, the first thing you have to do is learn how to stop. So as you learn to regulate your physiology from fight or flight to safety, it's game on. You can take on stress, bring on something new. Because
we need
having, yeah. So, but it's a learned skill set, and again, it takes practice. And when people, what the research shows, if you just bounce from technique to technique, it's actually counterproductive. You actually decrease your learning. So again, it's like learn how to play the piano, play the scales, start advancing through it. And then everybody has a different journey because everybody is so different. But no, it's very consistent.
Yeah. Would you give, we're nearly running out of time now. Would you talk a little bit about your involvement with Love Heals movie? Because you play quite a prominent part in that. And I think our audience would like to know a little bit more about it. And
so Dana was a person I worked with for about maybe a year and a half or a year. And when I first met her, I thought she had no chance. I mean, she had 2 surgeries. She was in totally what I call the abyss. She had no hope. Same thing with me personally. Remember, I'm also a success story. I had 15 years of chronic pain. I was totally in the abyss, suicide attempt, the whole thing. I mean, I was gone. So Dana was in the same spot with 2 failed surgeries, and they had gone badly. So she had worked on a few different things, had started the process, but just kept diving deeper and deeper and deeper. So she started working on the doc journey, started coming to my workshops twice a week, and just slowly, she came on board. Remember, there's 2 parts to healing. One is learn how to process the anxiety and anger. And the problem is when you have failed surgery, you now have the additional anger about having the surgery and also anger at the surgeon. So she had lots of anger to deal with. And so we learned the tools to process that. But I remember the conversation in the day. I said, look, Dana, we're working hard on fixing, but you can't fix yourself. The attention's on the problem, not the solution. So I just said it's time to move on. And within 6 weeks, at that point in time, she started to move forward. And the last 6 weeks, which has been a while now, she's almost 90% better. So once you tip that corner, your brain keeps changing and changing and changing. So once you actually hit that tipping point, people heal. And so what happened is that her partner, Christiana, is a documentary filmmaker. There was some reason that the instinct to start filming her before they knew what the outcome was being. They talked about the surgery, the recovery room, just the deep hole she was in, but she was in the hole when she was doing it. And nobody knew if she was going to come out, including me. So it's been a remarkably inspiring story. And what we're excited about, it gives us the platform to discuss what love is. And again, we can talk about this on another occasion. I can tell you what love isn't. But love is a physiological state of safety that really does allow healing. But it's bi-directional. You can actually process your triggers and allow yourself to feel safe and content, and love can enter or emerge. But again, on a given day-to-day basis, instead of complaining, just make a choice of choose joy, choose love. So if you have a choice of thinking ill about somebody or saying something ill, don't do it. Just be nice. So as you repetitively just choose love, choose niceness, choose kindness, your brain changes. But remember, none of us are programmed to do it that way. So we're excited about it. They're just getting started, getting out into the world. And again, you can't just generate feelings of love to heal your pain. It just doesn't work that way. But you can learn how to regulate your body's physiology in a way that that is very possible in healing.
Yeah, and noticing your panic about your symptoms, and starting to notice your panic about the symptoms rather than feeling the good parts of your life. the
Well, again,
relationship.
once you have the tools, we have found out that so there's 4 things out of Texas that actually have been shown to be very anti-inflammatory. In other words, your stresses change your body's inflammation. So we found out that positive affect or positive attitude is very critical. Um, social connection, being with friends and family, stimulates oxytocin. Um, what am I thinking about here? I'm just blanking out. So, I'm sorry, sense of control. So when you have control, it's actually anti-inflammatory. And so again, it's a catch-22. Is as you learn the tools to, um, control your symptoms, then that in of itself is anti-inflammatory. Oh, I'm sorry. The other one is hope and optimism. So they've been shown very clearly that hope and optimism are also anti-inflammatory. So since chronic anxiety is an inflammatory, by the way, anxiety is an inflammatory process. It is not psychological. Remember, it's a feeling that drives lots of behaviors that we give psychological diagnoses to. Remember, we're very good about dysfunctional coping behaviors. That's where the psychology comes into place as far as the diagnosis, like bipolar or whatever. But every bit of it's driven by the sensation that we call anxiety.
Good. We have got another question here, which is it's something that's interested me quite a bit. Is high cholesterol inflammatory? Because as I did my ISTDP training, I realized that once our venous system, our arterial system, becomes tense from anxiety, the cholesterol, the whole idea of having the cholesterol in your system is going to build up. It's going to cause a wear in the arterial system. I've been looking. There's a doctor in Germany that I've been trying to get hold of who actually works in this area, and but I haven't been able to get him to come on the program yet. But I do want to actually explore this more deeply with a clinician that actually works in the area. But can you respond to that, please?
Yeah, let me switch the thinking around here a little bit. So there's a huge amount of debate about this, about the chicken and the egg type thing. So the answer is I don't know the answer to that question specifically. So what causes atherosclerosis is inflammation. In other words, the inflammatory cells attack what's called the endothelium, or the lining of the blood vessels. It starts to break them down. Then you have rust spots where little platelets aggregate. Then the platelets themselves, platelets are little things that help clog up bleed, etc. Then the platelets themselves have inflammatory markers because that's the inflammation that causes blood to clot. So you get this cycle going of inflammation. And so we know that stress, i.e. fight or flight, creates an inflammatory response that breaks down blood vessels. That we know. I don't remember the data. I did know this once, that cholesterol is somehow mixed up in the middle of this. But I do remember 40 years ago, way before anybody knew anything about this, I was an internal medicine resident, and the cardiologists I worked with were nationally known. And they just said a long time ago that 75% of cardiac disease is caused by stress. I go, that made no sense to me back then. But remember, stress is not psychological. It's just a threat. Remember, your body response is a unit. So it's a total body response to a threat is what stress is. And again, thoughts are a stress. But stress it's your stress reaction or the fight or flight response. That's the problem.
Can you repeat that as our goodbye to our audience?
Well, again, if you're threatened by anything, stress, remember, it's your body's total, we respond as a unit. There's no such thing as mind versus body. It's just completely intertwined. It's a construct that came up in the 1600s that makes no sense. And so we don't use that term anymore. So I realize I should hear you guys use that, but I use it for years. I realized all sorts of things, that you cannot fly a Boeing jet without a computer. The Boeing jet has 2 million parts. The human body has 30 trillion cells, and it needs a central nervous system to coordinate actions between different parts of the body. You cannot run your body without a nervous system. So it is a unit response to a threat. So stress is the threat, and your body responds as a unit. But again, we think terms as stress is psychological, that we're just limbs, we have to put up with it, we should be tougher, etc. It's not true. You're watching your body's total response to a threat is what I call stress, or the stress response.
Lovely. We haven't got any more questions that I can see. So Rita's comment is, don't give the symptoms legs. That's a very good way of putting it. Yes.
Right. Now, but again, that's the hard part. This is the hardest part about the process. And this is honestly, you cannot understand. We're trying to learn new information based on old data. It's almost impossible for us to not fix yourself. In other words, we say, don't give the symptoms legs. It means don't think about it in a way, right? So whether you give the symptoms legs or don't give them legs, it doesn't matter. Either way, the symptoms are going to get legs. So again, that's where you process those thought patterns. But the healing occurs as you move forward into what you want to do, but not to distract yourself, just connecting with what is. So you connect with negativity, you connect with positivity. They're both very focused, specific, learned skills. And again, with repetition, this becomes automatic. So again, I'm a living example of somebody who's in 15 years of severe chronic pain, 17 different physical and mental symptoms. And I popped out of it in 2003, almost 20 years ago. And my wife might argue with you, but I'm fine. I mean, people just don't get over OCD. People don't get over anxiety reactions like that. The prognosis for OCD is terrible, and I'm really honestly completely fine. I do not have obsessive thought patterns. And they were the worst of the worst. So my message to you is that trying to get this diagnosis of anxiety correct is really critical, I think, for human survival. Our whole world is in a very anxious, survival, reactive mode. And so it's really critical for us to get this diagnosis correct. And the data's right there. I'm not making this stuff up. This is stuff that's all from digging into the literature and find out what's actually there.
It's all there.
So yeah, I think that the world somehow has got to get this figured out pretty darn quickly, because we're actually destroying ourselves right now.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. David Hanscom. Remember, he's an orthopedic surgeon. He's someone who's traveled the journey, has come out the other end. So not only do we have someone with the clinical knowledge and experience that we've just heard, but someone who's actually been on that journey that many of us have been on, and he understands where it's coming from. So thank you, David. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. I enjoy this. Yeah, I mean, I think you and Tova just do a great work. And we didn't get a chance to talk about your work, because I'm sure you talk about it on your show. But I mean, the work you're doing are some of the tools that actually help shift the nervous system. So, I mean, you're really dead on with what we're talking about.
Thank you. All right. Well, good morning from Melbourne, Australia.
Okay.
And good afternoon from Seattle.
Right.
In America. And thank you all, audience from all over the world. And goodbye until next week. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.